Chapter 4. Ben and the system spoke at length about each of his options. What they did, how they worked, their strengths and weaknesses. They all, in their own subtle ways, were immensely powerful and versatile tools, but ultimately Ben made a choice, and he felt it was the right one for him. Still, Ben felt it was important to understand the types of abilities other humans would have, and how they could synergize together. As it turned out, there was a pool of 6 items plus players could choose from, and one of the ways that Ben could have chosen to spend the benefits he received for waiving his right to be a void soul was to re-roll his item choices. The system had been more than happy to explain what all the other choices were, free of charge, but only because Ben had been so easy to deal with. Ben also had the option to spend all his benefits and outright purchase the starting plus perk of his choosing. He didn't do that. If he'd been given the option to purchase a second plus item, but the system had very politely cut off that possibility, saying, "One is quite enough, thank you." The benefits were esoteric, to say the least. On its surface, the benefits were stat points, like in a standard RPG. However, every stat had submenus upon submenus, covering increasingly specific and bizarre aspects of the stat. Things like standard advancement triad subsection feedback, subsection organization, location left index finger, muscle group 12. The sort of thing that certain people would thrive and really dive into, the sort of customization that was a min/maxer's wet dream. It was Ben's nightmare. He hated that sort of thing. So Ben had allocated his benefits in the most intelligent way he could possibly think to, by asking the system what it would recommend for him. Much to Ben's surprise, the system was more than happy to make suggestions. "Normally," he said, "this particular build wouldn't be possible, but you did make a smashing suggestion that led to the creation of a series of high-level primordial ruins. These aren't recreations either. I snatched them from your universe when nobody was looking," he said, a twinkle in his demonic, literally looking like the devil eye. "Are you allowed to do that? Also, isn't it against the rules to, help me like this and give me tips on how to, I don't know, succeed?" Then, the system laughed. It wasn't an uproarious laugh, and it wasn't mocking. "Against the rules? What rules? I make the rules, and I enforce them. This place is mine. Out there, I'm not playing favorites, and I'm not your friend. In here? Well, I'm enjoying myself. Your kind was already complicated the first time you came in here, and I am flabbergasted at how much you creatures have improved. What's up with the intestines full of bioweapons, or all these new animal forms you've suddenly come up with? Your kind was designed to be able to come back from a fragment of a psychic emanation and come back stronger, resistant to whatever destroyed your species. You've got to wonder to yourself," the system had said, "just how many thousands of times has your species been destroyed since the dawn of the universe? Well, I've said too much. Enjoy the primordial dungeons. They'll be a hoot and a half. Are you ready?" Ben had to admit he didn't feel ready. The system had been completely silent about where he would end up and what he could expect when he left. "I'm ready," Ben said. And the moment the words left his mouth, a crackling, vibrant red portal appeared off to his right. It swirled like a whirlpool of glowing electric blood and gave off an ominous and foreboding feeling. The system shrugged weakly. "I just want to make sure you all understand you aren't stepping into a friendly place. There are places of peace spread out in the world, cities and civilizations, but mostly vast tracts of wild, monster-infested lands, or worse, lands colonized by monsters. I'm proud to say my world is the only Category 1 death planet in the universe, and there will never be another. Category 1 death world? How does that compare to Earth? Ben asked, suddenly feeling a lot less friendly towards the suddenly much more menacing-looking demon. Earth? At its most dangerous, that was a Category 3. And before you ask, there has never been a Category 2. Enough of that, Ben! Step through the portal if you are ready. Ben stood, staring at the portal. The sound it made was like a deep rushing thrum. He stepped forward, but before he could enter the portal, a voice spoke. Warning! You are about to enter a Category 1 death planet. Do I actually have to step through that portal? Or is this all some sort of trick? Ben asked, suddenly really suspicious and nervous about this whole fucking bullshit thing. You are free to stay in this little room for the rest of your natural life, and I will, as an instance of the system, be happy to keep you company. I will not be able to provide you anything more substantial than conversation, I'm afraid. It's just... It really feels like I have to choose to walk through there. Like, I'm somehow responsible for this whole situation, you know? Like, you aren't allowed to throw me in there and I have to walk through of my own free will, right? Oh, is that all it is? The system said, suddenly smiling like the problem had just gotten much simpler. He stood up and stretched, his powerful body creaking and popping as he raised his arms up as high as they would go, stretching his fingers towards the ceiling and keeping them clear of the massive black horns coming off of his head. He brought his arms down and started shaking them out, jogging in place, his enormous goat-hoofed feet clacking loudly against the ground. "All right, let's do this," he said, his voice a playful roar as he charged towards Ben, who pissed his pants, unfortunately. The system grabbed him by the clothes, lifted him up like Mario did back in the old school days of gaming, and spun Ben around. Ben felt like he was going to vomit, and the system laughed, speaking with energy. "As you can see, what is about to happen was forced upon you, and you are completely innocent of the consequences and blame!" he shouted. Then let Ben go, launching him into the portal. The last thing Ben heard before he crossed over was the hearty laughter of the system and the words, "So long, gay Bowser!" Ben landed hard, sliding across crushed volcanic rock. It looked like black pumice someone had crushed and spread out like gravel. His skin scraped and it hurt. When he looked up, he was in a landscape that could only be described as hellish. The sky was red and thick with boiling clouds. The air was hot and sticky, and it howled as it rushed across the landscape. In the distance, there was a hill that Midwesterners would have called a mountain, bare of all soil, a solid piece of rock that jutted out of the ground. Ben's heart immediately started pounding as a horseman holding a scythe approached him, walking upright on two legs, hooves pounding heavily and without caution. It whinnied at him, the sound completely demonic. It echoed and warbled and seemed to contain layers and layers of sound. Then a bright green portal appeared right in front of Ben's prone form, laying flat on the ground like he was. It was the color of mint ice cream and gave off a very welcoming feeling. Directly in the center of the portal was a dark green plus sign, and Ben immediately began crawling for all he was worth away from the hellscape. Ben fell through the portal a short distance and landed on a soft surface. His adrenaline was high, and he flipped off his front and jumped up, his eyes scanning his surroundings for threats rather than for details. He was alone. Only when he verified that he was alone was he able to actually see where he was. It was a small, office-sized room lined with light blue tiles, the ceramic kind, with really clean white grout between them. The tiles were large enough to fit a whole foot on comfortably without any part of the foot crossing onto a line. In the exact center of the room, resting on a tile which was also exactly centered, was a sign. The sign was white, enclosed behind glass, and sitting on a brass pole that brought it to about diaphragm height on Ben. The whole thing was resting comfortably on a heavy-looking brass base. Ben immediately tried to lift it and realized that just wasn't going to happen. "Guess not," he said to himself, his voice soft, talking to calm himself down. "Really glad to be a plus player right now." Ben rubbed the back of his neck, his brain unhelpfully conjuring a mental image of the demonic horseman who he realized only now was completely soaked in blood. His brain seemed to find endless energy to focus on the black, bristly hair of the image, realizing how it had gotten its slightly wet and shiny texture. "Okay," he said, giving his cheeks a few light slaps. "No more fucking around." Ben turned his attention to the sign and started to read. "Welcome Plus Player. As you no doubt fondly remember from your last time in the system, which from now on will be referred to as the world, the standard starting area is located in one of the lower and more remote hell caverns, the Portal Labyrinth. Nothing could be considered a more refreshing wake-up call than running from a nigh indestructible labyrinth lord without a single level to your name." "Nigh indestructible," Ben muttered to himself, making a face. "Why do the puns worry me more than the monster?" "Fear not, for though you have entered the Plus Player starter area exclusive to only Plus players, if you so desire, merely say, 'Do it again,' with some excitement in your voice, and you will be transported back instantly to a random location in the labyrinth with a marker over your head, so your old friend, translated from lower demonic, he who teaches evil, he who sifts darkness from light, he who is a shepherd of paradise, can come teach you another sermon about how power ought to be used on those below you." The text on the sign appeared handwritten, but scrolled like it was a computer tablet. "If you choose to remain, well, you've earned it for being the only bastards crazy enough to jump into the world not just once but twice. The entire Plus system had only been developed as a matter of being thorough after you people got out, not because we actually expected it to get used. Take a moment to bask in the glory because humanity has finally done it. The high and the low, the light and the void, angels and demons, and everyone in between all finally have something they can agree on without reservation. You humans are completely fucking insane." "Thank you," Ben said, mostly out of reflex. He could have taken a few moments and said something like, "I don't even know why I'm here, I didn't choose this at all," or something along those lines. But complaining about blame and fault hadn't really worked out that well for him last time, so his brain didn't even consciously consider the option. "As you have no doubt guessed, the function of this area is the same as the Portal Labyrinth. You will wander about endlessly until you find a portal which will transport you into the world proper, where your new life will begin. Happy hunting, and remember, there isn't a horrible monster chasing you this time around, so you don't have to jump into the first exit you see. Well, at least there wasn't a monster the last time I checked." This message was last updated 60 billion years ago. At that exact moment, Ben's brain, which was sympathetically overworked and a real testament to human brains everywhere in that it hadn't shut down yet from sheer conceptual overload, fixated on two things. First, the universe was, at our best guess, between 13 and 14 billion years old. Second, if the system wasn't lying, this sign was older than the universe many times over. And suddenly, third, Ben realized the system hadn't placed this sign here until after humanity had beaten the game the first time, which meant humanity was older than the sign, and if he understood the principles of greater than math correctly— "Fuck, my head hurts so bad," Ben said, falling onto his butt and massaging his scalp. He felt a migraine coming on. He just knew it. He had that really sick, tense feeling in the back of his neck that was starting to spread up his skull, a feeling which could only be described as pre-pain. He started finger-kneading the back of his head and neck, knowing full well that it didn't help, and might even make it worse, but also still doing it anyways. He wanted to lay down, but it had been 60 billion years since anyone bothered to check if there was a monster in here, which is a long time. Then, probably born from a desperate desire to rationalize a way to lay down and sleep without feeling like he was in danger, Ben reread the part of the sign that said Plus Player Exclusive Area. Monsters aren't Plus players, Ben reasoned. And the system more or less said that only humans had ever beaten the game before. So, there won't be any monsters in here. Therefore, Ben said, already stripping his sweaty clothes off and trying to find a way to make a somewhat comfortable pillow out of them, I'm safe. I think I can handle this. I bet the world is like that. It seems crazy and chaotic at first, but really, it's like a puzzle. Just gotta... Ben yawned, his head resting on his fluffed-up pile of shirt and jeans. Gotta use my head. God, this is such a relief, he said, the moment he was horizontal. The pre-pain feeling had transformed into a weird floaty buzz that made him feel like any kind of major movement would guarantee him getting a bad migraine. Ben had been through this song and dance before. He knew how to operate his body reasonably well. His eyes shut, and soon, peaceful oblivion overtook him. System log update. I cannot believe I am being forced to do this, but if I don't put a stop to this right now, there are going to be serious problems. This was not meant to be an exploit, and the fact that you people are using it as such boggles my gigantic, ancient mind. There is now a hard cap on the number of individuals allowed to utilize the Ring of Sacrifice. I'm sure humanity will be tickled pink to find out they are the ones responsible for this new balance change. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I negated what those who already sacrificed themselves had done, but in the future, if any species is crazy enough to do what you have, they'll be stopped at nearly half the number your kind got to before I hit the brakes. Did you monsters just come back to torment me? Now I'm starting to remember why I was so happy when you all left. Void souls do not qualify for the protection and benefits granted by the Ring of Sacrifice, as they are no longer connected to either humanity or any other conscious being. System log end. Ben felt the words in his mind as he drifted to sleep, and strangely he knew he would have no problem remembering them when he woke up. He fell into a deep and restful slumber, the kind of sleep a body needs after the apocalypse and the death of parents and nearly dying and realizing humanity was way older than the universe. That is to say, without so many words, that he didn't have any dreams. When he woke up, only in his boxers, I might note, he saw a dark figure looming over him, watching him without blinking. Ben jumped a little, and the figure backed up, laughing and raising his hands like it was all a big joke. "Easy there, big boy. I knew that would be funny," he said. And as Ben's eyes sharpened to the situation, he realized he was looking at another human. The guy was younger, probably about 22, dressed casually with an easy, wide grin. "God! You scared the shit out of me. Why did you do that?" "Just wanted to laugh," he said, completely relaxed, a big smile on his face. Something about him seemed extremely wrong to Ben, and he realized it was the eyes. They were normal eyes, physically, but every time he saw them it sent his nervous system off and made him want to flinch. "Oh yeah," he said, still smiling and scratching the back of his head, and Ben couldn't help but notice how big and expansive all of his body language and facial expressions had been.
Okay, the system warned me about this. You're feeling really freaked out, right?
Right. You are very disturbing. I'm sorry, it's rude to say, but the sight of you is setting me off bad.
Yeah, I should have expected it. I'm in the wrong here 100%. The system said there were drawbacks to becoming a void soul, but the benefits, man, I couldn't pass them up.
Ben startled and looked at the man again, eyes wide. You're a void soul? Ben practically whispered, his voice on the edge of being straight up horrified.
I'm a void soul,
he said with confidence, his voice purely matter-of-fact.
And I think that was the best decision I've ever made.
How? Wait, let me get... Ben shouted the how, then started putting his pants on, struggling in that way only people who were in a rush to get their clothes on did. His foot got caught in the leg, his hands couldn't seem to grip the pants properly, so it kept slipping, the whole comedy routine. The void soul across from him watched the whole thing, still smiling, clearly finding the whole scene very amusing. He had been smiling when Ben woke up, hadn't he? Finally, Ben was dressed enough to start chewing the guy out with some dignity. How? How was that a good choice? No, better question, how are you even walking around and talking? You don't have any consciousness, you're just, like, empty.
Oh, it's like you say. And my name's Namey. I still haven't thought of a better one.
Nope, he said, rapping his knuckles against his skull.
Nothing. I don't see a damn thing. I can't hear or smell or taste or feel anything. I can't think and I don't have emotions. It's like I'm the part of a dream you don't remember, you know? Like those bits before you're in a coffee shop in France. The how did I get here?
He paused and adjusted his smile, leaning in a little, acting like he was sharing a secret.
I'm the how did I get here, my new friend. I don't feel a thing, but...
He trailed off, and his smile finally went away. And his face was intense, like he was far, far away. He clenched his fists hard. Hard in the way a person cannot clench a fist because it hurts too much.
I feel so tremendously free. Like a being of pure intellect finally outside of my cage and in the driver's seat. Here, ask me anything. Just some random thing. Like what I ate for lunch when I was 4 years and 13 days old, he said, then didn't let Ben ask. I had leftover pancakes from breakfast. No fumbling about for a memory, no uncertainty, no reaching about the dark of the mind, bumbling about the dark place with eyes blind, without the light of consciousness.
Namey laughed then, and it was quintessentially hollow.
I am the dark of the mind. I am that dark place, and I need no eyes to see. Still,
he said, suddenly smiling again and abruptly changing gears, placing his hands over his eyes like he was playing peekaboo.
However I'm processing information I can't see, he made air quotes with his fingers, which were still covering his eyes, through my hands, so ripping my eyes out just isn't going to happen. I'm pretty sure I still need them somehow, for some reason.
Yeah, Ben said, his lips a thin line. That would have been my first thought, too. That I just couldn't rip my own eyes out because I needed them.
See, you get it! Bet you regret signing that waiver now, buddy, Namey said.
And it was sad, because he honestly meant it.
But anyways, that's neither here nor there,
he said, and leaned in like he was going to tell me another secret.
I've got a proposition for you, and it's gonna pay off big. Set you up really well in your new life,
Namey said, and held out his hand where a beautiful light shone above it. It was golden like wealth and power, and beautiful like wealth and power could be beautiful.
This right here? This is a no-fucking-joke wish. Here's the deal, ready?
Do you want me to grant you your wish?
Chapter 5. Anything you want? What's your name? Namie asked.
Brian, Ben said, treating Namie the way he would treat anyone who was so clearly insane. And you're serious? Ben just had to know. He just had to. Because he already knew exactly what game this was. The red and black pyramid was clearly Namie's choice for his plus item.
Right, Brian.
Namie looked left and right, holding himself like a guy expecting the cops will show up any minute.
But this is our chance to make some real fucking money, Brian. Take the deal, quick!
Ben, also known as Brian, was imagining Namie getting arrested and telling the cops that Ben was the real boss of the whole operation and that Ben had slipped that huge bag of crystal meth into his jacket, officer. Namie had to have taken the pyramid, which held the official name of the Worm Enclosure. Why was it called that? Well, I'll tell you. Because inside the pyramid was, in the exact words of the system, the most wretched and abysmally wicked creature in existence, the worm. For as long as the holder took care of the worm, it would grant him the greatest power of all. The power to grant wishes. Or more specifically, the Dark Wish ability. It really did work. The wishes were actually granted. They just weren't free. Let's say a level 20 warrior class wishes for a very powerful magical axe. The warrior would get the axe, and it would be very powerful and very magical. It would look sinister and edgy in some way, but it would function just fine. Then, at some point in the future, the caster would activate the Dark Wish, after it had finished seeping into the person and extracted its price. The accumulated power of 20 levels would leave the warrior and be given to the one who granted the Dark Wish. Unfortunately for the warrior, it didn't stop there. The wish would then begin to consume and change their bodies, transferring even more power to the caster until the warrior was completely transformed into a demon. The size of the wish determined how low on the demonic hierarchy the person would end up. Standard Dark Wish? They end up an imp. Extremely large Dark Wish? They might end up as Hell Slime. A wish even larger than that? They'd become something not even worth describing. Something which would make you unclean to have seen, even for a moment. Why would anyone accept such an awful deal, aside from being completely duped? Because there was a way out. Once the hypothetical warrior got their badass axe, they also got a new ability, courtesy of their new lord, capital L. Lesser Dark Wish. It's not as powerful as Dark Wish, but it gets the job done. The warrior would only have to grant, for an axe like that, the Dark Wishes of 5 others. Once that happened, when the time came to pay up, those 5 other people would pay their own bill, and the warriors too. Those 5 people naturally also have a way out. They're brand new, obviously beta-tested, lesser Dark Wish ability. But what if the warrior isn't just stupid, but a complete asshole? Once he starts granting wishes above the threshold of his debt, he starts gaining power in the same way as the original caster. What does the original caster get out of this? The worm will whisper in his ear, telling him what will happen the exact moment he triggers the Dark Wish. In addition to incredible power in the form of stolen experience and stats, the caster will be transformed into a greater demonic life form. If they grant a Dark Wish and trigger the ability as soon as they are able to, they would become an imp. While that may seem like a downgrade, a 20-plus level imp is nothing to sneer at. If they waited a bit, let it spread around, they would make it to Lesser Demon, which is pretty strong. If they played their cards right, gathered themselves an aggressive core group who were dedicated to gaining powerful demonic powers, who were ruthless in their exploitation of others, the little fucker might transform all the way into a demon king, with a complete court of archdemons, greater demons, an army of lesser demons, and a legion of imps at their disposal. So, the worm. Why did it do that? If it was so powerful, why allow itself to be used like that? The answer was simple. The worm was ugly, weak, and required the one who was caring for it to personally attend to it every day. The worm could have been powerful, but instead it chose to be pathetic and sickly for a reason that only makes sense to the incredibly wicked. It wanted to have the most powerful being in the world waiting on it hand and foot. To have the whole planet tremble in fear at the slightest twitch of its flaccid and pale body. Ben, naturally, had not chosen the worm enclosure as his plus item. Namie was still talking. He seemed incapable of understanding that even though Ben was occasionally nodding and giving encouraging noises, he clearly wasn't interested. Ben coughed and started to talk, and Namie instantly went quiet to listen. "Oh, won't that turn me into a demon under your control? Right? Won't it?" "No, it won't do that. It's free, a free wish, come on. Don't you want a full set of legendary powerful armor? I can snap my fingers and give it to you like that." Namie snapped his fingers and gave Ben an expectant look. "No, I'm good." "Oh. Okay. Well, do you have any advice for me about how to do it better next time?" Namie wasn't remotely apologetic about his behavior, his body language instantly shifting gears into a disinterested exit. Don't be so obviously evil?" Ben said in surprise, a little shocked at the conversational whiplash. Good idea. "Gotta go, Brian. I've got a lot of people to talk to," he said with a flat face, then gave an exaggerated wink and walked off. When Namie was well and truly gone, and Ben was sure he wasn't hiding around the corner, he breathed a sigh of relief and put his shirt back on. "I'm glad he didn't try and kill me," Ben said, shaking his head. "That was, disturbing," he continued, speaking only to himself. Who hears your consciousness will be extinguished and thinks, "That's for me"? I bet that guy was a school shooter or something, or planning one. Fuck. I should have attacked him now that I think about it, Ben said, stretching his body and warming it up like he was about to go to the gym. That guy is going to seriously use that scammy ability and exploit as many people as he possibly can for his own personal gain. And the worst part is, he's completely incapable of feeling any guilt about it. Ben shook his head and started jogging in place, then continued stretching until he'd worked up a light sweat. Then he tried to steal the sign one last time, really throwing his back into pulling it off the floor. He didn't get it to budge, so with nothing left for him to do, he started walking. The entire area, from floor to ceiling, was lined with blue tiles of the exact same size, perfectly arranged. There were no visible lights, but the area was well lit. Ben figured that if he was 6 feet tall, which he was, then that meant the tiles were about 2 by 2 in feet, because the top of his head was pretty close to the top of the third tile up. Now that Ben was thinking about it and really examining his surroundings, he realized those were some big tiles. 4 tiles across on the ground, 5 tiles going up, and 4 across the ceiling. Ben felt pretty sure he had a good grip on the exact dimensions of this hallway. All of this is a very fancy way of saying there was literally nothing interesting about the hallway, and it was a very long walk. Eventually, Ben made it to another room, this one with a visible distortion in the air, which Ben assumed was a portal to the world. In addition to the portal, the room had 3 exits, one off of each wall, not including the one Ben came through. When he approached the shimmering distortion, words appeared inside of it. the heart of the dark capital of the goblins. Ben carefully sidestepped around the portal and chose an exit at random. This continued on for a while, and Ben passed up such attractive options as Heart of a Volcano, Lair of a Flesh Elemental, the Endless Desert, and one simply labeled Pain Zone, without any explanation. He also came across a portal which said Another Plus Players Portal Network, which was likely how Namie had come across him. Ben couldn't say how long he'd been wandering, but eventually he ended up taking a piss through a portal labeled A Hostile King's Throne Room, and much to Ben's delight, the liquid vanished upon contact with the portal. He realized it was childish, but he'd been moving around for hours, and every option he came across had been comically bad. After that, Ben continued his walk. A city in which you will be enslaved, forest with a high chance of having your body stolen by ghosts. No. And all it said was, no. Lost continent, extreme danger. Ben got a little hungry, and he had worked up a sweat from the long walks. He was thirsty but didn't have anything to drink. Finally, he was so exhausted he had to lay down and take a nap, and when he woke up, nothing had changed. He started yelling incoherently when he woke up, hitting a wall and letting out some of his pent-up frustration. Finally, he was gasping for air and still very hungry, dehydrated, and in dirty clothes. Worse than any of that, though, was that he still had to get up, pick a hallway, and start walking again. The legendary treasure hoard of Durs, the arch-wizard, no possibility of escape, frozen wasteland, city of thieves, the last dungeon, you will die. Your dad would have thought this one was funny. Third floor of Cactus Dungeon. Ben had been walking on autopilot, and his brain just registered that it had made a mistake. He was fortunate he hadn't gone too far and was able to retrace his steps back until he was standing in front of one of the endless portals available to him. Dad would have thought this one was funny, Ben said, only now realizing that the only likely reason the portals were labeled the way they were was the Ring of Sacrifice and the absurd amount of humanity who had chosen to give everyone else a better shot in exchange for their lives. Ben shut his eyes and said a silent prayer for them, and thanked them for what they did. Then opened them and looked at the portal. Dad wouldn't have thought me dying was funny, I know that much. In theory, I could keep going and potentially find something better. Ben trailed off and didn't finish. He could do that. But he'd already been in here for what must be close to 24 hours, a full day. He was still in pretty good shape, but that wasn't going to last much longer. He needed water, and he needed to eat, and if he stayed in this place much longer, he might go insane. He ran his tongue across his upper set of teeth, scrunched his face at the portal, then blew a raspberry and scowled. This was it, he realized. Once he stepped through, things were going to try and kill him. The system hadn't given him details, but he had told him this. The world is like this. You've played video games before, haven't you? Imagine living in a place where you can get attacked by monsters 3 times going to the store to buy bread. That's what it's like out there. Ben had asked why humanity was there in the first place, and the system had said he'd placed all the information he would need in the human-exclusive primordial ruins. Ben knew he was stalling, because he was man enough to admit he was scared. He'd never been in a life-or-death fight before. He'd been a city employee. The scariest thing he ever had to do was tell homeless people to scram so he could clean up all their garbage. Nobody had ever pulled a knife on him or tackled him or anything. Still stalling. Have a damn adventure, Ben said, squeezing his eyes shut so tight he saw lights. He opened them and let the spots clear, took a deep breath, and stepped through the portal.
Ben experienced that unique human emotion that one feels when they take a step down a flight of stairs and realize a step is missing and their foot starts to fall and take the whole body with it. One moment, he was in the maddeningly monotonous maze that had been driving him mad, and the next he was falling through the air, heading towards a vast body of water. The air felt fresh, but Ben only had time to enjoy it for a few moments before he plunged into the ocean, going deep before rising to the surface like a cork. Ben was frantically thanking God that he could swim as he treaded water. It was like this. His hair was thick with water and hung flat. He tasted salt and had water in his ears and in his eyes. His shoes suddenly felt like a terrible weight on his body, and so did his clothes. Still, the important parts were above the water, so he really didn't have too much to complain about. Ben's head was on a swivel, metaphorically, as he took in his surroundings. The sky above him, blue, check. The water, also blue, and for some reason Ben's brain reminded him that the ocean primarily got its color from the sky, so check. Sun, yellow, check. Moon that looked exactly like Earth's moon, check. And was that actually Earth's moon? Guess the system felt like doing a little pilfering, and it's not like anyone was going to miss it anymore. If it wasn't for the fact that he was in a completely unknown location in the middle of an ocean, he'd feel pretty good. The water was a comfortable temperature, the air smelled nice, and the sun felt good on the parts of his body that weren't underwater. Ben swam one way and scanned the horizon, then swam the other way and scanned in that direction as well. Then Ben did the same thing to his left and his right before treading water with an expression that was trying not to be worried. His eyebrows were up, and he was smiling and laughing lightly, but anyone would be able to tell he was starting to panic. Wow, there's really nothing out here at all. I'm really in the middle of the ocean, aren't I? Well, fuck! Ben shouted, then slapped the water in front of him with an arm, sending out a glittering spray. Ben stayed in that spot for just a little while, mentally cataloging his available resources, which was basically nothing useful in this situation. Ben started swimming, and continued swimming for exactly 1 minute and 3 seconds before he realized something horrible. He was not in shape for swimming, and he was most likely going to die out here if he didn't find land. Sure, he'd been hitting the gym in preparation for a vacation to Hawaii, and sure, he'd been running, but swimming was a completely different beast than running, something Ben was starting to become soberingly aware of. "I've just got to think," Ben said aloud, doing his best to keep his head from dipping under the water. "I've just got to figure this out." Because his dad wouldn't have thought this was funny unless there was a solution. "I shouldn't have picked the fucking bag of holding!" Ben shouted, suddenly thinking of his, at the time, extremely practical decision to select the black hole with the glowing purple edges. What he should have done was re-rolled the items till he got the one. Wait. But it wasn't a bag of holding, not really, was it? Ben had only thought of it like that because he was familiar with the concept, but calling it that and thinking of it like that only covered 30, possibly 35% of what it actually was. The system had called it the utility pocket and told him that, like all the other plus items he was handing out, it pushed the boundaries of what he could introduce into the world without upsetting its balance. The first thing he'd been told was that the edges were soft and pliable and would never cut anything, no matter how hard he tried to find a way to make it happen. First rule: either it goes in one piece or it doesn't go in at all. Second rule: using the pocket will consume your mana until it's gone. Then it will consume your physical energy, and finally it will consume your life force. Don't worry. When about half of your mana is gone, you will stop using it, trust me, the system had said, then winked at him in an exaggerated way.
Third rule, you can resize the utility pocket with mana. You will consume mana to take objects into it, and you will consume mana to take objects out of it. Your mana pool determines how much material you can store. The more mana you can store in your body, the more you can fit in the utility pocket. The size of your mana pool also determines how large you can make the pocket, and to what degree you can change its shape. Fourth rule, it's cheaper to reach into the utility pocket and pull something out than eject it. You can expend additional mana to eject something with more force. You can also use mana to create a suction effect. Fifth rule, you can make more than one pocket, and this is again governed by the maximum size of your mana pool. Sixth rule, the mana cost for all actions grows in proportion to the distance of the utility pocket from your heart. The most dangerous part of the utility pocket is its ability to cause instant death should you be so foolish as to create an opening 10 miles away. Rule 7, there is no safety mechanism on the utility pocket, and it will not turn off before it kills you. Rule 8, at this point, Ben had started to wonder just how many rules this thing had. If more than half of the outer edge of the utility pocket is in contact with your body, it is considered a part of you, and moving it around is close to free mana-wise. If it is not in contact with your body, you can still move it around in space, but you pay full price. Be careful trying to use this thing like a bug net to scoop things up. That's a good way to seriously hurt yourself. Rule 9. If you create 2 utility pockets, you can transfer objects freely between them. Yes, Ben, the system had said, clearly reading Ben's mind when he heard Rule 9. You can use the utility pocket as a way to extend your reach. You could even put your whole body through it. But that action will, without exception, completely drain all of your remaining mana and deduct the cost directly from your physical energy. Rule 10. This isn't really a rule so much as some free advice. This is an extremely versatile item, which is why it has the word utility in its name. A sword will always be a more efficient weapon, and an actual shield will always be a better shield, but you will never find an item with more utility than this one. Feel free to experiment. And don't curse my name if you get killed because you were too focused on being a one-trick pony. Ben was pulled from his memories by a wave that crashed over his head, bringing him back to reality. Not a bag of holding at all, he said, pushing with his mind like he'd been doing it his whole life, and creating a small half-dollar-size hole in reality with what looked like little tentacles of purple light coming off of the edges. Ben closed it and started reframing the problem he was faced with. Before, his problem was that he couldn't swim forever and he was going to drown. Now, I just need to keep my head above the water and start moving forward, he murmured, breathing hard, his arms and legs starting to burn with the effort of keeping afloat. Ben created another pocket. He wasn't sure what to name it yet, and he wasn't about to start giving it any thought. He created a pocket in front of his chest, about the size of a dinner plate, and monitored how he felt for a moment to see how it affected him. The pocket sat in the water, inert and fixed in space, looking like a tiny black hole on the surface of the water. Ben felt a barely perceptible strain on his mind, like the strain one might feel if someone asked them to remember a specific, small number and repeat it back to them in 5 minutes. He took a deep, labored breath and began to focus on the pocket, willing it to start taking in the water. A few things happened immediately. First, Ben felt the strain on his mind increase from remembering a 2-digit number to remembering a 5-digit number. Second, the water in front of him immediately dipped down towards the hole like it was a drain. And third, Ben started falling forward towards the open utility pocket.
It happened so fast, a sudden lurch, and then he was horizontal rather than vertical, and his face was in the water. When he hit the hole, it folded a bit like fabric and went down with him, still taking in water, except at a faster rate the deeper it went. Ben was fortunate he had the sense of mind to close it, or he could have ended up in a much worse situation. Ben righted himself and got back to the surface, spitting out salt water and blinking until he could see properly again. Somewhere in his mind, he was aware of exactly how much water he was holding, and had a more general awareness of how much more he could take in before he was at his limit. He was at less than half capacity, which wasn't an insignificant amount at all. Ben created another pocket, this one attached to his hand, and let the water out. It came out quickly enough and splashed against the surface of the ocean. Then Ben submerged his hand and pushed, giving the utility pouch some energy. The results were, again, immediate. The water shot out in a fairly rapid jet, and by Newton's laws, did Ben suddenly find himself underwater again. This time he was rapidly spinning in a circle and couldn't tell up from down till he cut the power and let himself start to float. His head broke the surface for what felt like the 100th time that day, but unlike the last imaginary 99 times, this time he was smiling practically from ear to ear. "Well, that worked," he said, and started to experiment. Chapter 6. Ben had never in his life expected to feel like a motorboat, or to think, "I feel just like a motorboat right now," while his chest and stomach impacted against the surface of the ocean for the 10 millionth time. His body was numb, his eyes were practically burned open, his skin was chafed, he'd lost his shoes over 2 hours ago, and his clothing was shredded to rags. If anyone had asked him how he felt, he would have screamed, "Woo!" with a voice hoarse from saying woo so much over the last few hours. He had a system, and it seemed to be working out for him. He would fill up the utility pocket with water in front of him, and eject it out of a utility pocket attached to his feet. He felt he really needed to come up with a less clunky way of thinking about this thing than utility pocket. At first, it had been extremely rough, attempting to position the utility pocket at the appropriate angle for his feet and then trying to hold his body rigidly in the right position. It was only out of sheer frustration that he discovered the utility pocket was both extremely flexible and could stick to anything without a problem. Right now, his feet were pressed together, and the pocket was attached to the outer perimeter. The little purple tendrils would reach out and stick themselves to pretty much anything. It was, Ben reflected, a bit like a pair of toe shoes, the ones that had been a fad a few years back, except it was one big shoe that held his feet firmly together. The nice thing was, he could angle his feet this way or that and control how he was being propelled forward. It was shockingly intuitive for him, to the point that he wondered if it really was as easy as it felt, or if some sort of magic was involved. Ben struggled not with steering and controlling himself, but with everything he had to keep track of to make it happen. Mana management. How to adjust how fast something was ejected from the utility pocket. How to reshape it, and how to form and maintain multiple pockets. Watching how much water he had stored away. And finally, keeping a slow enough pace that he didn't burn himself out and drown or tear the flesh from his chest. Ben had also learned that attempting to make a third pocket was a terrible idea, and his head was still sore from that stunt. Someday, he thought to himself, but not today. The hardest part about pretending to be a jet ski, silently mourning the loss of his Hawaiian vacation in his own way, was how tired his legs got. The pressure was constant, and though it wasn't intense, it was tiring. Ben zoomed across the water, feeling like he was moving 50 miles an hour. In reality, he was somewhere between 10 and 15. Inside of a car, that's painfully slow, but skipping across the surface of the ocean? Still, he was getting exhausted. Adrenaline could only take someone so far, and his adrenal gland had to be puffing out dust by now. He was breathing hard, his eyes were tired and unreliable for finding anything short of a continent, and he was starting to hear music and see flashes of imagery when he blinked. Worse, he was starting to see it even when his eyes were open. "Hypnagogic imagery," Ben said, feeling the crash coming all at once, like a toddler stopping in the middle of play and falling asleep. Shit, I really am going to die out here. Then Ben laughed, because dying, or indeed anything else, seemed preferable to staying awake at this point. Horrible way to go, unless I manage to sleep through drowning. Oh, God, Ben said, his adrenal gland teaming up with his amygdala to give him one last jolt of juice. Is that how drowning at sea is? You fall asleep, then drown a little, then wake up and struggle, then repeat that till you're dead? Ben's heart would have started pounding, except he didn't have the energy for that, or even to be afraid for more than 3 seconds before his vision started going dark again. Ben jolted awake, spluttering, pushing water from out of his nose and splashing around awkwardly, which sent him wildly off course, so he immediately closed the utility pockets and weakly righted himself. His limbs felt like they were made of wood, and his muscles were almost completely numb. Ben's vision started going dark again, and he knew as his consciousness faded that if he fell asleep, he would not wake up. He struggled to keep his eyes open when he spotted something that made him relax. Not a ship, not an island, not a convenient raft he could climb onto and sleep. No, what he saw was a single tall fin rise from the ocean some distance away, and it filled him with relief, because it meant his struggles were over. It was a damned shark, and a huge one. Ben shut his eyes, and mere moments later, he felt the teeth bite into his flesh, and his body plunge into the depths. System update. You have gained the skill Lesser Endurance. You have gained the skill Lesser Mana Manipulation. Please visit a town crystal to activate your new skills. Ben groaned, laying down flat on something wet but solid. He didn't want to open his eyes, but the moment consciousness returned to him, he felt the cuts over his body from the shark's teeth burning from the salt water. Ben groaned again, louder this time, and opened his eyes. The sky was dark, approaching the end of evening and the beginning of night. All around Ben, the ocean was calm, and waves crashed gently. He looked around expecting to be on an island, but instead finding that he was on top of a sandbar of some kind, still out in the middle of the ocean, and barely elevated 3 inches over sea level. He stood up and stretched, his body still tired, but at least he could move around and keep his eyes open. Ben took in his surroundings again, really looking around to figure out what the hell was going on. The sandbar, or whatever he was standing on, was disappointingly small, 10 by 10 at best. It extended out underwater for quite a ways before it got too deep to stand on, but compared to the ocean he was in... Shit, Ben said, summarizing his whole situation in a single word. Ho there! The voice was masculine and a little deep, but Ben couldn't tell where it came from. Hello? Ben shouted, because the person had sounded pretty far away. You're awake, the voice said again, his tone mildly surprised. Good. I thought all that effort was going to be for nothing, he said. And Ben realized that whoever was speaking to him was doing so by some sort of telepathy. It was odd, because Ben could figure out their rough location just like if he'd heard them, but he definitely wasn't using his ears to do so. You saved me? Ben said, feeling like he was stating the obvious. Oh yes! Lost my arms doing it, but I managed to kill that enormous shark and drag you to safety. Suddenly, the voice changed pitch, becoming higher and feminine. Oh my telepathy was acting up. This is how I really sound. I'm one of the sea folk, a beautiful woman.
She said, sounding playful. Oh, Ben said, frowning and doing his best not to insult the apparently beautiful woman who had saved his life. Okay, well, thank you.
Wait, did you say you lost your arms?
Ben blurted out, eyebrows rising.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Your arms, both of them? Oh, that's terrible. Wait, how did you drag...
Ben started to ask, but the voice started talking again.
Oh, it's so terrible. My precious arms. How could I live without them and their ability to grasp things without shredding them to pieces?
The voice said, then abruptly changed back to masculine and deep. As for how I carried you... The light was almost all gone now. The sun had vanished over the horizon. The sky was only lit by dim embers, and the water was like black glass. Ben saw the fin rise from the ocean, gray and dangerous looking. The shark came close enough to the surface so Ben could look him in his beady black eye. I carried you in my mouth, little Lord Human. How else? Then, under the gaze of a completely speechless Ben, the shark submerged again, chuckling. I think I could have gotten you to believe I was an attractive female. Ha ha ha! He said, clearly pleased with himself and enunciating every word with clear relish. I think I'd prefer it if you were, Ben said without thinking, his eyes frantically scanning the increasingly dark water for the huge telepathic shark that had saved him. Wait, you dragged me to this little spit of land? Why'd you save me? Aside from us both being Earthlings, you are human, the next stage of development for our species. It's only natural for me to be looking out for you. Our species? Ben could only have realistically picked one thing to focus on, and his brain had latched onto that. Yes, our species. A world without sharks and dangerous monsters could never produce a human being. But we aren't on Earth anymore, are we? I spoke with the system, and I, along with most all of the other animals, chose the bright spark as our plus perk. Finally, we can speak to one another human. Tell me, are you hungry? Yes, Ben said, all hesitation at making friends with a telepathic great white shark vanishing. I'm starving. Do you have anything? Or water, fresh water? Wait there, the shark said, then chuckled some more because where the hell was Ben going to get off to? It was over 15 hours before the shark came back, though the evening light hadn't faded much at all, so Ben admitted to himself that it was more like 15 minutes. Rah! The shark telepathically roared at Ben, who unfortunately pissed his shredded, unserviceable pants and dove away from it as it charged the beach. People, in general, don't know shit about sharks. Those who do know anything only knew what they looked like through a screen, or the numbers attached to them, how big and how heavy they are, how many teeth they have, how much food they had to eat per day, academic stuff. Here's something no YouTube video can convey. The shark powered through the water, his body exposed, and the only thing Ben could think was that he was being attacked by a creature the size of the short bus everybody liked to make fun of so much. It was so fucking enormous, all thoughts of fighting became hilarious, and suddenly Ben was hearing the theme song from Jaws. Dun-dun, the shark whispered, turning around faster than any creature that size had any right to and going back into the ocean, swimming around lazily. Dun-dun, he whispered again, then started chuckling darkly to himself.
On the sandbar was a weakly, flopping fish that didn't look like anything Ben had ever seen. First off, it was longer than Ben was tall, and colored a green so bright it was vibrant even in the dark. It helped that it seemed to be faintly luminescent. It had a horn coming off of its head, and blades on its fins, making it look like something bred for battle first and living second. Its fins were really cool, too, all long and flexible, looking like blades of grass, and something clicked in Ben's brain, and his body started moving without telling it to. He was consciously aware of what he was doing as he walked up to the fish and started prodding it with his hands. No tools around. Ben's hands were covered in sand, but luckily the tide was coming in, so he was quickly able to wash them in the ocean. The water just barely went up to his toenails, and didn't seem like it would get much higher. He started grabbing at the fish, pulling at the fins gently at first, then with greater and greater force, trying to find a way to... His stomach growled and his hunger exploded into pure energy because in front of him was food. He had not eaten at the airport. The time from when he woke up in the system until now had been at least 48 hours worth of intense, life-or-death struggles of physical activity. Ben had not been aware of what real hunger was, nor was he aware of just how intense real hunger could be. He had never felt anything in his life as intense as what he was feeling right now, and his consciousness was just a passenger in his body being swept along for the ride. Ben started attacking the enormous fish, clawing at it with his dull human fingers and finding no way through the armor-like scales. Then Ben's stomach, because let's be real here, his brain wasn't in charge anymore, found the obvious solution of going for where the enormous shark had already injured the fish. Ben dug in like a hungry wolf pup being fed by its parents, which is to say he got covered in gore. His ratty clothing actually resembled slick, bloody fur, and he was panting on the ground, exhausted, with a potbelly full of meat. It had, to Ben at least, all happened in a flash. One moment he was starving on the sandbar, the next he was doing an impression of a werewolf the morning after a full moon. In reality, he'd killed several parasites living in the fish that looked like pill bugs crossed with centipedes in his fight for food. They had crawled out of the guts and tried to attack Ben, but he had grabbed them and whipped them around by the head, their bodies going limp and then quickly discarded before he went back to tearing chunks of meat out by the handful. He was laying on the wet sand, the water tickling his ears, but he could stand it for a bit longer. "I love sushi," Ben said, staring up at the stars. "But I think I don't love it so much anymore." He didn't know if he should feel ashamed of himself or if he should feel... He stared up at the black night sky and truly appreciated that he was in a different world. The stars were not stars here. They were a grid of distant white lights spread out equidistant from one another, like how the tiles in the Plus Player starter area had been. There was beauty in them, but not like the Earth's night sky held. "So strange," Ben heard the voice of the shark and saw his fin slowly circling the sandbar. "To be swimming in a foreign ocean, to have taken my stars for granted." Ben was no longer afraid of the shark. At least not in the way a civilized person was afraid of an animal. Ben rolled around in the water for a bit to clean up, then tried to lay down again, but whatever spell he was under had been broken, and he couldn't get comfortable with his head even slightly submerged. Ben stood up and looked around, his eyes landing on the thick fish. "Well, this is going to get gross," he said, then scrunched his face as he tried to press his reluctant body against the giant dead fish. It was a bit like sitting down in a metal chair without a shirt on. The moment of contact, the cold, was intense for a moment or two, then immediately became bearable. Except instead of it being cold, it was just really gross. Then Ben was able to mentally shrug and rest his head against it without reservation. Aside from it being the single most what-the-fuck pillow he'd ever used, it was surprisingly comfortable. The shark, for his part, had waited for Ben to finish, and Ben got the sense that the shark thought it was an interesting scene.
"I swam in my ocean," he continued, "and it never occurred to me it had a name," he said. "I would come to the surface to catch a glimpse of the lights, like the lights of the creatures of the deep, but more. I thought they were creatures as well. I would dive deep, wondering what could possibly be that large and not wanting to attract its attention."
Ben hummed, knowing that somehow the shark could hear him as long as he meant to talk with him. Don't feel too bad about that. We thought the same thing. A bunch of people liked to imagine there were gigantic tentacled monstrosities up there that could drive us mad with a single glance.
Ah! They should have tried going deep and lingering in the black and cold for weeks. They would have met their fears in the flesh, I guarantee it.
Did you ever see stuff like that?
Certainly. Down in the dark, I'm food if I'm not careful. I wouldn't say no to seeing a giant squid around here.
Ben got the impression the shark was attempting to grin.
I'd like to try talking with one before I ate it.
That's rude, Ben said, still staring at the stars, his stomach weighing him down. You shouldn't eat anything that can talk to you.
Why?
The shark asked. Because it's rude, Ben said, then yawned.
If you say so,
the shark replied, not sounding convinced.
Your kind is fond of naming everything, isn't it? What's yours?
Ben. How about you?
I'm a shark,
he said, saying it like Ben was a little stupid.
And this is the first opportunity I've had to speak with anyone about anything. I don't have a name, and from what I understand, naming yourself is considered to be bad form. What would you call me, Lord Human?
What's with this Lord Human stuff? Ben said, his voice obscured and distorted by a huge yawn.
You're a human, and your species ruled Earth completely. Every animal and plant was under your law. Further, you are a human, he said, giving the word special emphasis. The royal heir of the animals, destined to rule every world you emerge from, destined to rule all worlds, everywhere. The purpose of life on Earth was to produce your kind, just as your kind has the purpose to grow in strength and power, the shark said, and a flood of black emotion surged across whatever link was between them. Suddenly, changing topics, caged like animals, confined to a single world and murdered in your crib over and over again, forced to arise from nothing endlessly. The system would not tell me who, but I am so curious who did this to us, to you. I would like to kill them, drag them deep, and watch them drown.
Yeah, I've been trying not to think about it, Ben said, frowning. But the system dropped some really disturbing hints. Can you believe we're over 60 billion years old, possibly much older? The universe isn't even that old.
Speak for yourself. I'm only 29,
the shark said. No shit. So am I. When's your birthday?
I'm a shark, Ben.
Right, sorry. Wouldn't it be cool if we had the same birthday, though?
If you say so,
the shark said, sounding subdued.
I bet you got a name on your birthday, didn't you?
He asked, bringing up the name thing again. I did at that, Ben said, coughing a little and feeling his face turn a little red. And I can tell you want me to give you a name, and I've got one, but... How much do you understand about human culture, like the context of what our words mean?
I understand quite well, Ben.
Short bus, Ben blurted, and with way more conviction than he'd realized he felt. The night was silent in the space between Ben's naming and Shortbus's reply. Then Shortbus started laughing, deep, hearty, and powerful. "Oh," he said, in between his mirth. "Because I'm the size of... That is a fantastic name." "It really is," Ben said. "Shortbus the Great White Shark." Then he yawned again, because somehow the shark was way less scary than he'd been not even a minute ago, and he felt tired. "Get some sleep, Ben," Shortbus said, still circling the island. "You'll be safe for the night." Ben shut his eyes and found sleep waiting for him. In those last moments before oblivion, he heard Shortbus humming that same iconic song. Dun-dun. But only the slow part, and sung in a way divorced from danger. What a strange turn of events to have a lullaby like that. Shortbus swam through the dark ocean, patrolling around, falling into the moving sleep unique to sharks and fish, hearing a voice in his mind that did not wake him. System update. You have been given the name Shortbus. You have gained the skill Aquatic Agility. You have gained the skill Deft Jaws. Please visit a town crystal to activate your new skills. System announcement. Good morning, my honored residents. Now that most of them have been inducted, I am pleased to announce yet another species has been added to our community, though not for the first time. Some of your civilizations do have records reaching this far back, but for those who aren't aware, there is a way out of the world, and only one species has ever left. They're back! The humans are back. And as is custom, I've put together an event to celebrate. The humans will likely remember this little holiday from their own homeworld. Global event initiated. The Apocalypse. 8 passages to the bottom cavern layer have opened. 64 violet dungeon cores have formed. 512 Citadel-class monsters have been born. 4,096 demons have been released. 32,768 Raid-class elite monsters have been promoted. 262,144 Dark Fairies have joined forces to form the Bad Cloud. 2,097,152 monsters have been promoted to elites. 16,777,216 Void Soul humans have entered the world. As always, these welcome events are well calculated to match the potential power of our new neighbors. Additionally, some new monster classes have been introduced, courtesy of the human imagination. I won't ruin the surprise, but start checking under your beds and inside your closets daily, and that's just one of many. As always, feel free to share your suggestions with me by sending a message through your nearest town crystal, and, as usual, I will provide a detailed response. Have a great apocalypse, everyone! Chapter 7. The waves crashed against the sandbar, the ground under Ben dry and sticking to his body. The air had a distinctly fishy smell, and so did he. His lips were dry and his eyes felt sticky when he forced them open. The sky was purple today. Ben shut his eyes and tried to get comfortable, then abruptly opened them and shot up when he remembered what he'd been using as a pillow. The giant green fish that, in the light of day, resembled a bladed tuna with a horn and spikes shone brightly in the sun. The air around the alien tuna had just the faintest whiff of a fishy smell. It wouldn't be good to eat for much longer. Ugh. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. But this man's got to find a better place to get some sleep tonight. His shark bite hurt, but had scabbed over and wasn't bleeding. His entire front was chapped and sore from pretending to be a motorboat. His utility pocket was half full of seawater and raw fish, yet he could barely feel any of that for one simple reason. Ben smacked his lips, his tongue not quite moving as frictionlessly as it should through his mouth. "Water," he croaked, looking out at the ocean and feeling the urge to laugh. He walked out to the edge of the small beach he was on. His skin felt like jerky, rubbing against itself in an itchy, painful way. This was horrible. Ben couldn't believe he'd had a fantasy about having sex on the beach. He now realized what a remarkably uncomfortable experience that would have been. He walked out far enough for his feet to be submerged and dipped his index finger into the water, then brought it to his mouth. "Salty. That's just not going to work, buddy." Ben scanned the sea for a fin and saw only flat ocean all the way to the horizon in all directions. He cupped his hands over his mouth, making a crude amplifier. "Oi!" Ben shouted, his voice coming out as a weak croak at first. He coughed, then tried again. "Oi! Short bus, you out there?" Moments passed, then a fin rose from the water, moving along at a lazy pace.
"I'm here. Good morning, Ben. How did you sleep? Did you see the announcement? The apocalypse, just like on Earth."
"I slept as well as I could, and yeah, I saw it. It's troubling," Ben said honestly, "but I need to find some water, and soon."
"Water?"
the shark replied, clearly indicating the entire ocean with his tone. "I can't drink that," Ben said simply. "It'll make me sick."
"Drink?"
the shark said, again his tone indicating a clear lack of connection to the concept. "Yes, I need fresh water," Ben said, reaching around his brain for something Shortbus, a shark, would be familiar with. "No salt. Like the kind in a river. Oh! Like the kind that pours out into the ocean from land, where the rivers empty into the ocean."
"Do you mean an estuary?"
Shortbus said, a hint of reprimand in his tone at the insult to his intelligence. "Yes, an estuary," Ben said with relief. "Is there anything like that around?"
"No, but I imagine you were looking for land when I found you passed out, right?"
"Right," Ben affirmed.
"I've yet to see land, but you were not heading towards any. You were headed towards the deep ocean, away from land, Ben. These are strange waters to plunge into, mark my words."
"How do you know I was going the wrong way if you haven't seen any land?"
"I'm a shark," he said. "Do you think I can't tell my face from my caudal?"
Ben gave Shortbus a blank look, and despite the distance between the two, and the fact that Shortbus was underwater, he seemed to be able to tell.
"Caudal! My back fin, Ben. My head from my ass, that's how a human would say it."
"Oh, right," Ben said, coughing a little, and suddenly feeling insecure about the fact that a shark might actually have a better vocabulary than him. Ben wasn't stupid. He just hadn't had much chance to be smart the last 5 or so years, what with him being a manual shovel operator / technician and all.
"It's inherently obvious which direction a continental shelf is standing," he said.
And Ben realized the shark was calling him stupid by using a bunch of big words. The fucking shark was shit-talking him. Ben couldn't help but smile. "Oh yeah," Ben replied, stretching with his arms. "Just like how it's intuitively obvious how to pick something up with my hands, excuse me, my phalanges. Fins are okay too," he said quickly, then started stretching his hands and wiggling his phalanges in what could be considered a total dick move kind of way.
"Quiet, you,"
Shortbus said, then said more quietly to himself,
"Just you wait, I'll get some damn arms, and then you'll all see what a shark can do."
Okay, but seriously, Ben said, the feeling of being painfully dry, itchy, and thirsty eroding his good humor. You know where land is? Better yet, any kind of fresh water at all?
I know which way land is, but I don't know how far,
Short Bus said.
How urgently do you need water?
Very urgently, Ben said with extreme certainty.
I'm fortunate to have found this sandbar,
Short Bus said, sounding concerned.
There's nothing around here for a long time, and I don't know this ocean well at all. Are you sure you can't just drink what's here?
No! Not unless I... Then Ben stopped talking.
Ben?
Short Bus asked.
Not unless you what?
Call me stupid, you overgrown tuna, Ben muttered to himself. Short Bus, what's down there on the ocean floor? Is there anything I could use, like a really shallow, wide bowl? Scratch that. Is there anything I could use to hold water at all?
I'll look,
Short Bus said, and his fin dipped below the waves. The sun was brutal. Its light felt harsh on his skin, and the sand above the water was dry already. Ben, having nothing better to do, went over to the enormous fish and started trying to figure out a way to get something useful out of it. He reached into the hole he'd made and started, with more care and awareness than the previous night, removing messy handfuls of meat and storing them in his utility pocket, enough for a few meals. When he'd first started using the utility pocket in the ocean to propel himself around, it had felt like he was able to hold an unlimited volume of water. Now, in a survival situation, he was suddenly aware of how precious every cubic inch really was. It was a big space, true, but it also wasn't a big space. The unrelenting sun pounded down on him, and there was no shade to cool himself anywhere, no relief. He sagged down, looking out at the ocean with the mixed feelings of longing and frustration. Longing, because if he was swimming in the water, at least he would be cool. Frustration, because if he was swimming in the water, some monster could snatch him up before he even knew it. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore should have made him mad, but instead had the opposite effect, calming him with its hypnotic rhythm. What if, Ben thought to himself, the reason people were put into a calm, trance-like state from sound like this was that it made them want to stay on the beach? He imagined it like this. A group of primitive humans emerged from the jungle and explored for a while and then came onto a beach. It was strange and they didn't like it, so they went back to the jungle and all got eaten by panthers or something. Then another group did the same thing, and the cycle repeated over and over again till someone had the mutation that made them stop and listen to the waves for hours and be like, well, this is nice, I'll live here, and then discover how much food was on the beach and how much easier life was next to an ocean. Ben looked up from his half-delirious hallucination, scanned the horizon for a fin, and tried to dive back into the fantasy. Nope, he lost it. Right about the part where he impressed some really good-looking female with all the food he had in his palm leaf hut. The good part. Wish I had a palm leaf hut, Ben muttered. Or some damn shade. Wait, he said, suddenly excited. Ben opened a utility pocket the size of a CD, about a foot over his hand, and looked for a shadow with eager eyes. Fuck, he said, when he didn't see one. Then he tried bringing it closer and closer. Eventually, when it was about 2 inches away, it did cast a shadow, but only a faint one. Then Ben got the bright idea, pardon the pun, to try and capture the sunlight with his utility pocket to get some shade. It failed. The only thing he ended up storing was air, which he ejected as a compressed gust, frustrated. The sand scattered from the blast, and Ben didn't have anything better to do, so he started filling up the utility pocket with as much air as he could, then blasting it out, like a kid with a balloon. First he went gently, pushing around a few grains of sand. Then he went harder, then finally pushing it until his mind hurt, which was his logical limit. His limit right now was about as strong as a small air compressor. Strong, but not useful in a fight. He might be able to go harder, but it wasn't going to be unless he had to. Ben soon reached peak boredom. What is peak boredom? Well, first Ben grabbed a handful of sand and dumped it into the utility pocket. Then he started ejecting it, one grain at a time, based on the color of the grain of sand. Soon he had a tiny pile of black sand, a tiny pile of white sand, a tiny pile of slightly pink sand, and a very tiny pile of miscellaneous debris. There was also a pile of tiny white salt crystals. Ben smiled, gathered up the tiny pile of black sand and the salt, then yelled and destroyed the area like a kid will do to a sandcastle. He must have spent 2 hours doing that nonsense. His brain hurt both from the mana usage and from the sheer focus he'd needed to do that. When the sand had gone into the utility pouch, it had appeared like a big lump, and if he'd ejected it, it would have come out as a big lump. Even so, if he focused on it long enough, he became aware of its composition to a certain degree, and after that, it had been a matter of fine mental control to start sorting through the mass of very tiny pebbles. Ben immediately began examining the salt water, feeling a surge of excitement as he did so. What was matter anyways, but a bunch of atomic-sized pebbles? All he had to do was find the salt pebbles and separate them from the water pebbles. Genius! Ben had a crazed, manic expression on his face. His mind turned entirely inward as he focused on the water. Deeper, deeper. He saw little bits of stuff here and there, flecks of plant matter. Deeper. But no matter how deep he went, he couldn't seem to find the salt. Further, when he came out of it, his head felt like it was going to split in half. God, that would have been easy, Ben said, falling backwards onto the sand, trying to ignore the pain. He practically sobbed when he saw the fins circling the sandbar, which was getting smaller as the tide rose. Short Bus, you great, beautiful fish. Did you find anything?
Yes, I believe I have, he said. But that's the good news. What I found is not very deep for me, but I cannot grab it with my mouth. It's completely out of my reach.
Okay, Ben said, voice positive. Show me where it is. I've got arms, remember? Phalanges. Ben started wiggling his fingers like a crystal meth junkie doing jazz hands. Dehydration makes utter fools of us all.
All right, Short Bus said. I'll show you. Come out into the water and follow after me. You can hang on if you like, he said, but was interrupted by Ben jumping into the water, gathering a pocket full of ocean and jetting himself past the oceanic native. Come on, Slowpoke, move your caudal! Ha! Slow!
Short Bus roared, telepathically, of course, and surged forward. 8,000 pounds of pure marine predator, keeping pace with 190 pounds of magic-propelled land monkey. His fin cut the water and made white waves, and Ben pushed himself even harder, the need for fresh water overriding the logical part of his brain, the gamer part of him that was constantly trying to balance optimum mana usage against speed and, who cares, Ben thought. He'd slow down when he was tired, and he'd sped up when he wasn't. It hadn't been very long, but due to its critical role in his survival, he was quickly eroding the barrier between the utility pocket and himself, and starting to just think of it as a new limb. A very useful new limb that let him race great white sharks and sort sand with superhuman precision. Ben pushed it, the water chapping against his sunburned, bare, and injured chest, but the thrill of speed and the race was powerful enough to override the pain. First, Short Bus was merely content to keep pace, but Ben had awoken something in him, and his powerful body surged forward, trying to get ahead. Ben was panting, and he could tell Short Bus was approaching his top speed. He could, he thought, leave it all behind, burn hot, and win this stupid race. Ben slowed down, laughing, catching his breath as Short Bus blasted past him.
Ha! None are faster than me!
The shark crowed to the heavens and started circling Ben in a wide, friendly arc.
Do you need to catch your breath, Lord Human? Because I can do this all day, he said, then pumped his tail and began moving faster before slowing down again. Yes, Ben said, happy despite losing. I do need to catch my breath. I think you have me at a disadvantage here in the water. I'd definitely beat you on land. No, Short Bus practically sniffed. I'd win there too. Ben caught his breath, then began following behind the shark at a reasonable pace. It must have taken them 15 more minutes across the open water before Short Bus slowed down. It's here. There's a reef about, I'd say, 40, 50 feet down. There are some large empty clamshells down there, but I can't even get close. I'll hold on to a fin. Just dive me down there as fast as you can, and I'll zip in real quick, grab it, and you can pull me to the surface. Easy peasy. You'll see, Short Bus said, and slowed down enough for Ben to catch up and get a good grip. Deep breath. Down we go, he said, and they dove. It's worth it to really understand what that 5 or 10 seconds worth of experience looked like. To really picture it in the mind. Ben saw his arms, his familiar arms and his familiar skin, resting atop the classic light blue characteristic of a great white shark. That very famous fin. His hands were gripped around the dorsal fin, the one on top, the one most people only see poke above the water before they get chomped. The ocean water, reflecting the color of the sky, was a light purple. The waves playing across it and reflecting the light like a billion amethysts from horizon to horizon. The moment was frozen, and then Short Bus started to angle down, and Ben felt himself being drawn into the depths of the abyss. His vision, which had been dominated by the bright sun and the purple glow that suffused everything, tilted and was submerged in darkness. It should have burned or been more uncomfortable than it had been, but he kept his eyes open. Down they went too fast to be comfortable, and Ben already felt his lungs starting to feel tight. He couldn't believe he hadn't seen this from the surface. Across the abnormally high ocean floor was a massive coral reef, a festival's worth of color stacked high and all around. There, Short Bus thought at him, and Ben saw something that looked like a lumpy dome of coral. They approached it at high speed, and Ben's lungs were starting to seriously burn. He tried to tough it out, looking at the dome and finding it was hollow. Inside of it, some sort of bioluminescent something that allowed Ben to see various large clams scattered about, as well as a few empty shells. It was too much, and Ben started slapping Short Bus's side. Immediately, they angled straight up. Ben started releasing his air in bubbles, and it took everything he had to hold on as they surged up. They burst through the surface, and Ben began to gasp, taking deep breaths and then coughing. I told you, Short Bus said. There's just no way. Again, Ben gasped, doing something completely new with his utility pocket. The by now familiar black disc with its purple tendrils appeared at the top of Ben's middle finger on his right hand. The utility pocket was again about the size of a CD, and it passed through Ben's hand, which vanished as it entered. The utility pocket's purple tendrils seemed to grab onto Ben's skin and fuse with it, leaving him with no right hand. Ben then created a second utility pocket about 5 feet away and frowned. What? Short Bus asked, watching the display with obvious interest. I'm supposed to be able to use this thing like a portal, Ben explained. Hang on. Let me try this, he said, then pulled his hand from the first pocket. He connected the two pockets and put his hand through. It worked, and his hand appeared 5 feet away, disconnected from his body. There was, of course, a problem. Ben got to, for the first time, feel the immediate and sharp effect of using a large portion of his mana all at once. It was a headache, but the worst part of a headache without any of the build-up to get used to the idea of being in pain for a while.
Then he pulled his hand out from the connected portals and the pain doubled. "Ow," Ben said, in shock from how he'd gone from dehydrated and exhausted to being in sudden and intense pain. "I smell blood," Shortbus said, and Ben felt the blood dripping from his face. "Well, that didn't work," Ben said, holding on to Shortbus and waiting to recover. He was breathing hard, thinking. He needed those damn shells, and he'd like the clams and whatever else of value he could grab down there. His hope in coming out here was that he could either just grab whatever he needed or use a utility pocket portal and reach it, either with his hands or by scooping it up. He could, he admitted, probably pull it off, given enough time underwater to examine the problem. The real problem was that by the time he got there, he was already burning for another breath. Shortbus was, unfortunately, right. There really was no way. But I'll die if I don't get them, Ben thought. Even if he did get them, he wasn't sure if his dumbass scheme would even work. But he was positive he would die for sure if he didn't try. Ben took another deep breath, cursing his need for air. He created another utility pocket and stared at it, because it was his only tool, and he hadn't even scratched the surface of what it was capable of. The system had said every plus item was equal in power, even if it wasn't equal in apparent power. That meant this little tool was equal to an item that granted wishes and was basically a demonic kingdom in a box. Was the utility pocket intelligent? Ben hadn't asked, and it didn't seem true, but there was something going on with it. The more he used it, the more it seemed to enmesh with him. Like whatever it was getting all enmeshed with his neurons and starting to become automatic. With what strength he had left, which was very little, Ben created a small pocket a few inches above his eyes and began to suck in air until he was close to full. Then, without conscious thought, he ran a hand over his mouth, palm to fingers, like he was smearing something on his face, and in a way he was. A utility pocket was attached to his cheeks, his chin, and to the bridge of his nose. "I cast underwater breathing," Ben said, his voice almost vindictive, like he was talking to death itself and telling it no. Then he let go of Shortbus and dove, a second utility pocket forming at his feet and doing something it hadn't done before. It took in water on one side and pushed it out the other, all from one utility pocket. Ben went underwater like a torpedo and took his first breath, strangely unsurprised to find that it worked the way he thought it would. He took a breath in, and air came in. He let his breath out, and he pushed it back into the pocket. It just worked, and it felt so natural Ben couldn't even get excited about it, like he would have been worried if it didn't work the way he thought it would. Soon, he was at the dome again, and grabbed onto the coral to keep himself from floating to the surface. It was a big area. He hadn't appreciated that the last time he saw it, about the size of a 2-bedroom apartment. The coral had formed in such a strange way, almost like a lattice had guided it, and Ben could clearly see into parts of the interior. He climbed along the perimeter, peering in and looking for an entrance large enough to squeeze through. "Ben, over here!" It was Shortbus, and Ben jetted over, aware that he had only a few minutes of air. He'd just run out of the completely fresh stuff and was starting to recycle old breaths. Shortbus was circling a small hole that went into the ground about 3 or 4 feet away from the dome. "I think this is an entrance," he said with enthusiasm. "You just crawl in here and come out in there. I can smell it. The two are connected." "Is there anything living there?" Ben thought at the shark, and he seemed to hear it just fine. "Doubt it," he said. Ben shrugged because he really didn't have much choice either way. He angled his body so he was upside down and scrunched his face at the feeling of water going into his ears. Great, now he was going to get an ear infection. And crawled into the underwater tunnel, pulling himself along with his hands instead of using a jet. No need to kick up a bunch of silt and get blinded. It was claustrophobic, pitch black, and it scared the shit out of him, but eventually Ben made it to the other side of the tunnel, and because he was already on the verge of death, he wasn't stupid enough to pop up like a whack-a-mole. Ben very slowly poked his head out of the entrance, just enough to get a line of sight on what he needed. The shells were not far, and if he'd wanted to, he could have reached out an arm and grabbed one. He did not. Instead, he began stealing everything his utility pocket could comfortably reach, one pocket at a time. He got a few shells, which were quite large, bigger than dinner plates. There was more treasure in that dome. Ben hadn't seen what it was, but there was something shiny in that way that spoke to the greed in his very human soul. Treasure wasn't going to keep him alive. Not today, at least. Ben crawled out of the tunnel, feeling physically and mentally exhausted. The air he was breathing tasted gross, and it wasn't doing much for him anymore. "Get me out of here, short bus," Ben said, feeling weary but still grabbing onto the shark when he swam by and hanging on as he was dragged to the surface. Ben's utility pocket mask came off, and he breathed sweet, sweet air. "I'm all out of gas. Could you drag me back to the sandbar?" Ben asked, and Short Bus just started swimming. He blacked out but managed to keep his grip, then woke up again. He blacked out like that a couple of times. They made it back to the sandbar, and Ben crawled, thankful for the still relentless sunlight that scorched everything, turning his little spot of land into a desert in the middle of the ocean. He dragged himself to a good position and dropped the shells into a pile, sorting them till he found one that would work immediately for his purposes. He angled it so it got maximum sun, filled it with a thin layer of water, then sealed it with a utility pocket shaped like a dome. The purple tendrils gripped the edge of the shell, looking like some sort of future gel. Ben knew that though he couldn't see through it, the sunlight was not obstructed or made any less hot by the utility pocket's presence. Ben allowed the pocket to start taking in air and willed it to have a gentle suction. The shell, which had been resting on the sand, jumped a little. Ben drank the sight in and wished it was water, the strange, large alien shell with a strange alien black dome over the top of it. He knew it was sealed and that the inside of it was a vacuum. He just sucked all the air out. He knew exactly how much air it was, too. He could feel it in his brain. He sat down, cross-legged, eyes glued to the sight, waiting, praying, cursing that this was his best shot, his only shot. Then it happened. Ben shut his eyes and took a quiet breath in. Many humans in the past have taken the exact same breath. The breath that means it's all going to be okay. The breath of quiet satisfaction. Of gratitude. The water inside the shell was evaporating, and the water vapor was being collected by the utility pocket. Ben felt the tiny, insubstantial wisps of water vapor inside his... his inventory? Too crude a word. He still had some work to do. He had to cool the vapors and condense them before he had precious, life-giving distilled water, but that was no challenge. He knew how he would do it. Ben would have cried, but he didn't have the water. At least, he didn't have it yet. System announcement. I'm getting a lot of queries through the suggestion box, both about the humans and the apocalypse. It's happening, people, trust me. The abominations and forgotten things near the abyss boundary are just as surprised as the rest of you. Normally, I'd respond to every individual, and I still am, but the number of requests for more information has reached such a magnitude that I feel a worldwide announcement was in order. First off, yes! The humans are here. It's a big, big world, so it's not my fault none of you have noticed them yet. None of you seem to know what they look like, so I'll give you a hint. Imagine everything their reputation suggests. Then make your expectations much smaller. As for the apocalypse, well, Violet Core dungeons are by nature unpredictable and mobile. Citadel-class monsters still have to actually build their citadels, and the demons are already in your cities, fostering division. As for all the others, well... Ask Arcanum about the bad cloud. Oh wait, too soon.
As for the humans who have managed the difficult task of getting their hands on a town crystal and writing me, your profanity delights me. And when I'm delighted, I tend to triple the void processing in your area. As for your little problem, reach level 10. I'm not sorry. It was either this or something else to get you creatures even remotely balanced for the world. I've also removed your ability and your need to poop. Don't ask how. I'm somewhat ashamed of my solution. The lucky fellow who necessitated this change gets to keep his Plague Lord class, and he still gets to reap the benefits of the ongoing plague, but enough is enough. I remember well enough from last time not to make the mistake of taking away your precious ability to fart. I don't need to deal with endless complaining on top of everything else. I hope you all have a great day, and have fun playing.
Chapter 8. A song was playing in Ben's head. It was the kind of song that played on the radio when he was a kid, and it sounded just like Feel Good Inc. by the Gorillaz. Ben had solved all the problems, and the answer was utility pocket. He had food stored in the utility pocket. He had fresh water stored in the utility pocket. He had solved the problem of skipping across the surface of the ocean and tearing his skin up. He'd just jet around underwater and breathe through a utility pocket. Ben's face was relaxed, and he powered through the sea about a foot under the surface. The utility pocket was the solution to the ancient question humans have had, the question called survival. Either his air was starting to get a little stale, or Ben had discovered why dolphins did it, because Ben launched himself out of the ocean as high as he could and arced before diving back below, replenishing his air. Naturally, Short Bus jumped out of the water right after and made sure to try and get higher than Ben had. Extremely fun fact about great whites: they can jump like bonkers high. He crashed back into the water, for moments looking like a fast-moving cloud before the air rose to the surface. Where were they going? At the moment, nowhere, because Ben had some pent-up emotion to work through, and he'd adopted training the utility pocket as his mode of therapy. Because the more he thought about it, the more he was sure that the utility pocket could be trained. It just seemed to naturally find more and more efficient ways to do the same tasks over and over again. Some things were still impossible, and Ben had the bruises to prove that he couldn't fly. If he was lucky, Short Bus would stop mentioning it sometime in the next year or so. Ben did a few underwater flips, then a few tight maneuvers, imagining to himself that he was going to get into a fight with a giant crab or something when he went back to that coral dome to plunder the rest of whatever was in there. Now that his basic survival needs were met, he felt a lot more comfortable taking up precious pouch space with treasure. Ben clenched a fist, then pushed himself to the surface, holding himself upright and steady with a jet of water from his feet. "So weird," he said, scanning the horizon. "We haven't seen anything yet except that fish." "You haven't gone very deep," Short Bus chided. "And you shouldn't go deep either. You aren't built for it, despite how you swim around like a squid." "I don't think I want to go very deep either," Ben admitted. "As much fun as all this is, I'd like to get to land as soon as possible, get a nice palm leaf hut, and impress some jungle woman with all my meat." "Fuck, that came out wrong," Ben said, and Short Bus didn't reply. "Ben," Short Bus said, speeding up, heading away from the sandbar and towards the direction of land. "I'm very concerned about why the sky is purple." "Oh yeah?" Ben replied, diving back below and speeding up to match him. He couldn't help but marvel at how effortless it was, how it had become as easy as walking. "You are familiar with my plus perk, aren't you? You got the system to tell you about all of them," he said, a hint of worry in his tone. "I wouldn't say I got him to. He was very forthcoming with information," Ben said, rolling his eyes at what a chatterbox the system had been. How excited it had been to go into details and mechanics. How everything played against one another, and asking for suggestions and feedback. The system had called him a delight, and told him not to hesitate to write via the suggestion box system accessible through a town crystal.
But you are familiar with it,
Short Bus said, firmer this time, demanding a straight answer. Yes, the bright spark, Ben said, reciting what he knew from memory. It was a really good option from what I remember. It granted increased consciousness, psychic powers, immunity to mental debuffs, and an increased affinity for certain kinds of magic. Oh, and it also provided the common knowledge skill, though the system said he'd only elaborate if I picked the bright spark.
That explanation is like a flayed fish, Short Bus said. All bones and no meat. Common knowledge means that every morning I wake up in an area, and don't ask me how an area is defined. I gain an increased sense of everything. What is what, who is who, how is how, why is why, where is where, when is when. I get a portion of the collective knowledge of the area, the sense that comes from living in a place for generations.
Well, that sounds really useful, Ben said, spinning through the water after having discovered how to create diagonal jets off of his feet. He was listening, Short Bus could tell, because Short Bus was connected to Ben's mind.
There used to be monsters in this area, Ben.
There it was, the shark thought to himself. That bright flash in his brain, the sudden reorienting of attention.
Yes, I'm glad you are paying attention, Ben, Short Bus continued. But when the sky turned purple, the monsters all ran away. Aside from us, there are no other creatures around for... I don't know. It's just us, and it worries me. Very badly worries me. It makes me think there is something tremendously dangerous somewhere deep below us. It makes me think that the coral reef, which should have been crawling with monsters, was abandoned in a hurry. I haven't seen a single fish anywhere, aside from myself, of course.
Think it has to do with the apocalypse event?
Do you have a better explanation? There were 8, let's call them calamities, associated with the event, and I think each of them was considered equal and was ranked by... concentration of danger... of power. The most dangerous, he continued. The 8 entrances to the bottom caverns. Those were, I think, the most individually dangerous of the whole thing, each one equal to 8 individual units of the next calamity. I think we are in the range of the second one. The 64 violet dungeon cores. Why? The sky is purple, and the dungeon cores are called violet, thus associating them with the color purple.
That's a pretty simple and straightforward way of looking at it, Ben said, wanting to rub his chin but unable to for fear of getting thrown off course by his arm acting as a rudder. I don't think you're wrong, though. Does common knowledge give you anything about violet dungeon cores?
Danger, Short Bus said. Dangerous. And that we should run until the sky isn't purple anymore.
So Ben and Short Bus stopped talking and started getting the hell out of Dodge. They continued on for about an hour before they both needed to take a break to slow down. The sky above them was still purple, and it was starting to make Ben worried. How big is the range on this thing? Ben asked aloud, feeling more and more on edge.
Big. It's a second-tier calamity, Short Bus said.
You're really committed to that on-the-spot classification system, Ben said, laughing a little at the shark's expense.
I'm just trying to make some sense of a world that as of yet makes no sense. Bring a little bit of order to the chaos, Short Bus said, sounding dignified and self-important. Okay, but I'm just looking at this logically, right? Ben said, and they started moving again, at a slower resting pace. You said it's all about the 8s.
and they're all equal to one another based on that. So, one Violet Dungeon core is worth 8... What was the next one? 8 Citadel-class monsters? Good so far? Yes, Short Bus replied, and the shark already knew what Ben was going to say next, but didn't interrupt him. So that means a Violet core is equal to 64 demons, and also equal to 512... Ben fumbled for the information, and Short Bus supplied it. And 512 raid-class monsters, and 4,096 dark fairies, and so on and so forth, yes. That sounds really, really powerful. I hope you're wrong, dude, Ben said, wishing he and the shark could swim twice as fast and 4 times as far before needing a break. It sounds incredibly dangerous, if I'm right. And everything you've told me about the system, and everything I saw from it, tells me he is a big fan of balancing things in such a way. Wait, Ben said, having found a wrench to throw into Short Bus's logic, and throwing it because he didn't want to be chased by something worse than a pack of 64 demons. But that whole event was supposed to be balanced against humans. And all life on Earth, Short Bus quickly added. Being introduced to the world, how does that make any sense? They swam in silence, having caught their breath, so to speak, and resumed their previous fast pace. It's because of all the sharks, Short Bus said with confidence. Yeah, it's probably that, Ben said, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry on behalf of all sharks that our power was so great that the system has endangered all life because of it. Ben looked over and saw something that he would bet his utility pocket that no other human, in their apparently very long history, had ever seen. Short Bus, a shark, had eyelids, and his eyes were closed tight in an expression of real regret. You are so full of shit, Ben said, laughing and speeding up, leaving the great white to his self-important ruminations. I understand how this might endanger our friendship, Short Bus said, his tone absurdly sincere, as he easily caught up with Ben and tried to awkwardly lay a fin across his back. Get the hell away from me, Ben laughed, speeding up. I understand humans are fond of close contact, Ben. I know you have suffered a devastating blow to your mammalian sense of self-worth and importance. As a shark, I am uniquely suited to tell you that you still have value. You are welcome. Now, slow down, and let me give you the hug, which common knowledge tells me is so vital to your mental health. Your skill is broken if it's telling you to give me a hug, Ben said, now having to dodge a great white shark as it kept bumping into him and saying things like, you poor thing, and don't bottle up your feelings, and it's okay to be sad. The effect was ruined because Short Bus was laughing every time he bumped into Ben with a fin and saw him run away. You aren't running from me, you're running from yourself, Short Bus shouted after Ben had kicked into high gear and finally gotten some distance between them. You're insane, Ben shouted back, his mood greatly improved. Oh, look, Short Bus said, suddenly changing gears. That's not something you see every day. He angled up towards the surface, and Ben followed his lead. The sky above them was purple, true, but off in the distance, separated as though by a razor, was blue sky. Ben telepathically whistled. No, it is not, he agreed. If you would like, Short Bus said, we could turn around, see if we could catch a glimpse of whatever's back there. No way. The last time I saw a demon, I pissed my pants, and if you're right, that thing is worth 64 demons. No, thanks, Ben said, suddenly finding a hidden reserve of strength to draw on and speeding towards the blue sky. I never saw a demon, Short Bus said, following after him. It was after I left the room with the system, Ben explained. In the portal labyrinth? I never saw anything like that, Short Bus said. The system opened a green portal for me, and I ended up in an incredibly boring underwater building. I swam for a while till I found a portal labeled Safe Ocean and went through. Lucky. I ended up in hell for about half a minute. There was this awful horseman with a scythe. Was all Short Bus said in response. And they continued on until eventually they reached the edge, the boundary between whatever the hell was going on behind them and whatever the hell was in front of them. Even the water was blue, as opposed to the weird psychedelic purple they had been traveling through. Think, Ben said, stopping before he crossed over. Something'll happen if we leave? Like, we'll trigger some sort of alarm? Oh, just charge right on through, sure, Ben said, his heart palpitating for some reason when he saw Short Bus carelessly shatter his completely imaginary reasons for hesitation. I am a shark, Short Bus trumpeted. I fear nothing. You were just afraid of the Violet Dungeon Core, Ben said, catching up with him. I was merely pretending for your benefit. Ben watched Short Bus do the great white shark equivalent of zoomies, like an excited pet might do after being let out into the yard. He was pumping his powerful tail, going as fast as he could, then turning sharply in a tight figure eight, expressively and loudly declaring the inherent superiority of sharks over all other sea creatures, especially, and specifically, dolphins. Ben, a practical and somewhat wise man, a man of almost 30 years, who had secured a good career and the respect of his peers in a life that no longer mattered, swam away from the egomaniac and let him bask in self-assigned glory. There was a time and a place for everything, and Short Bus was the size of, well, a small bus. It had taken Short Bus nearly 5 minutes before he realized Ben had left, but eventually he caught up and they continued their journey through the now blue water, under a thankfully blue sky. Soon enough, they even began to encounter schools of fish, though not of any variety Ben or Short Bus could recognize. They were small, about the size of Ben's hand at the largest, but there were thousands of them, and Short Bus took great delight in charging through their school, blasting them with a psychic yell. That part had been funny, but what had been hilarious, at least to Ben, had been when the fish began to mob Short Bus and start zapping him with little painful jolts of electricity. No! Stop! He yelled. The system declared me a noble. I'm nobility. I'm the ruler of the seas. Ow! Right in the coddle. Ben, we must flee! Swim for your life! Ben had almost drowned laughing. And it was worth noting that even though the school of electric fish were enraged, they didn't attack him. Short Bus survived. According to him, he ate the entire school of fish. Living up to your name, Short Bus, Ben said, and the shark shot him a dirty look. Then finally, land. Land ho! Ben shouted, and Short Bus shouted it too. Just peeking up over the edge of the world, Ben could see some green like grass. The closer they got, the taller the land got. Eventually, Ben realized he was looking at an enormous cliff face. It was like every seaside cliff, sheer, sharp, and had jagged, ship-destroying rocks along its base. I see, Short Bus said, talking like he was nodding his head in a sagely manner. You are going to use your flexible, durable arm noodles to climb the cliff. I'm not going to do that, Ben said, scanning the land and seeing what his best move would be. Well, Short Bus, we can either go left or we can go right. My goal is to find a nice coastal town with some docks or something. A place with a town crystal both of us can use. I figure the two of us could do pretty well as fishermen or... I don't know yet. But we need to find somewhere along the water. I suggest left, then, Short Bus said, sounding determined. Proud, but in a real way. The shark hadn't doubted that he and Ben would stick together, but it had been nice to see the sentiment expressed out loud. Why left? Ben asked, only tangentially aware of how his words had affected Short Bus. I smell garbage to the left and not to the right. If there's one thing I know about coastal towns, it's that they always dump their garbage into the water."
"Good enough for me," Ben said, and started heading further towards the shore.
"I'll follow along out here," Shortbus said. "It's getting a bit too shallow for my tastes."
Right, Ben said, and continued towards land like it was pulling him magnetically. Eventually, he found the water was getting too shallow for him as well and pulled back to where he could safely swim beneath the surface without having to worry about running into a boulder at speed. The cliffs went on and on forever, or at least that is how it felt to Ben, but eventually they began to lose their height, lowering, level. Oh, sweet, sweet land. The beach itself was less sand and more pebble, like in the Pacific Northwest, but it was still a beach, attached to a real landmass. The beach stretched for a little ways, getting higher and higher, the pebble sand turning to soil, which abruptly turned to enormous trees. Ben was struck by the sight of something only his ancestors had ever seen. Primeval forest, untouched by civilization. The trees resembled the gigantic redwoods down in California, but in the way a professional football player might resemble his accountant younger brother. As much as it would be totally fun to just run onto the beach, roll around on the solid land, and feel real gravity again, the sight of the fuck-huge forest that stretched along the edge of the beach as far as the eye could see activated his nope sense. Yep, that was a nope. If a certain space elf had been watching, which he wasn't, he would have called what Ben had done complete bullshit. Most alien species did not have a nope sense, because most alien species developed on planets that could be considered paradise, at least from the human perspective. Ben, having just come from a partly tamed, monster-infested hellhole of a planet, at least by alien standards, chose to do the smart thing and just cruise the coastline until he was sure there weren't a bunch of fucked-up monsters waiting to catch him with a net, tie him up to a stick, and carry him back to their lair. Ben cruised along for a while until he heard Shortbus speaking into his mind from the distant water.
"I smell blood, Ben. Coming from the land, blood. It's weird blood. Go check it out, I'm curious."
Ben surfaced just enough to get his eyes above the water, feeling like a crocodile, and he stealthily made his way towards the shore. Well, would you look at that, Ben thought to himself. The creatures he saw were strange, squat little things, covered in thick, short, stiff-looking brown fur. They had triangular ears coming off the top of their heads, and they were dressed in crude leather clothing. Their bodies looked sturdy. There were 4 of them, and they were carrying a stick between them, hunters carrying their prey. The prey? A gray little humanoid straight out of the fucking tabloids. It had a big head, creepy gigantic black eyes, and also breasts. Apparently this one was female. She hung, tied up with crude rope, defeated. One of the creatures turned its head, scanning the ocean, and Ben saw it had enormous, bulging, solid red eyes with vertical slits for pupils and 2 sharp, thin teeth jutted up from its lower jaw. It didn't see Ben, and turned its attention to the slightly creepy, slightly curvy gray woman, and gave her a sharp poke with its spear. She screamed. Ben took a deep breath through his utility pocket and shut his eyes, saying a silent prayer of gratitude. Respect the nope sense. Then Ben abandoned all good sense and started making his way towards the fucked-up monsters to try and save the fucked-up alien girl.